On the 22nd of February, 1979, a woman named Faraday Diba stood on the tarmac at Tehran's Mehrabad airport watching the last El Al flight to Tel Aviv disappear into the dust haze above the Zagros Mountains. She was holding the hand of her 6-year-old daughter. Both of them had Iranian passports. Both of them had Jewish mothers. Under Jewish law, that made them Jewish. Under the new Islamic Republic that had seized power 16 days earlier, that made them targets. The flight left without them. Within 3 months, Faraday and 217 other Iranian Jews who missed that evacuation would be arrested, interrogated, and, in 43 cases, executed. Not for espionage, not for collaboration, for having Jewish mothers. Because in the chaos of revolution, an ancient religious principle about maternal descent had become a death sentence. And the man who signed those execution orders, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, was following a logic that traced back not to politics or geopolitics, but to a 2,000-year-old rabbinical ruling designed to protect Jewish survival during the Roman occupation of Judea. The same law that saved the Jewish people in the 1st century would mark them for extinction in the 20th. 3 things will make sense only at the end. First, before 1979, Iran and Israel were allies, military allies, intelligence allies, oil pipeline allies. The Shah of Iran called Israel his friend. Israeli advisors trained Iranian commandos. Iranian oil flowed to Haifa through a secret pipeline that officially did not exist. Then Khomeini returned from exile, and within 6 months, Iran went from Israel's closest regional partner to its most committed enemy. The shift was so fast and so total that intelligence agencies across the world are still analyzing what happened. Second, the matrilineal descent rule, the principle that Jewishness passes through the mother, was not always the standard. For the first 1,000 years of Jewish history, tribal identity followed the father. The switch happened in the 2nd century of the Common Era, during Roman occupation, and the reason it switched is darker than most rabbis will admit. Third, there is a specific meeting that took place in Qom in March of 1979, 3 weeks after Khomeini took power, where a group of clerics presented him with a list. The list had names, Iranian Jews. The meeting lasted 4 hours. What was said in that room has never been fully disclosed, but the outcome is documented. Within 2 weeks, the arrests began. By the end of this, you will know exactly why Khomeini turned Iran into Israel's mortal enemy, why the matrilineal principle made that turn inevitable, and why a rabbinic decision made under Roman swords in the 2nd century created the ideological framework that defines the Israeli-Iranian conflict today. Winter, 1978. Tehran is burning. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, is losing control. Protests erupt daily. The military fires into crowds. Thousands are dead. The oil workers are on strike. The economy is collapsing. And in a suburb of Paris, in the French village of Neauphle-le-Château, an elderly cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini is giving interviews to international journalists and promising a new Iran. An Islamic Iran, a just Iran, an Iran free from Western domination. He does not mention Israel in these interviews, not yet, because in 1978, attacking Israel is not the priority. Attacking the Shah is the priority, and the Shah's relationship with Israel is complicated. Here is what most documentaries skip. The Shah and Israel were not just diplomatic partners. They were strategic codependents locked in a regional alliance that both sides needed desperately, and neither side could publicly acknowledge. The relationship started in 1950, 1 year after Israel's founding. Iran was one of the first Muslim-majority countries to recognize the State of Israel. Not out of love, out of necessity. Iran needed a regional counterweight to the Arab states, especially Egypt and Iraq. Israel needed a non-Arab partner in the Middle East. They found each other. By 1960, the relationship had deepened into something unprecedented. Israel was training Iranian intelligence officers. The Mossad and Savak, the Shah's secret police, were running joint operations. Israeli military advisors were embedded with Iranian commando units, and beneath all of it, invisible to most of the world, was the pipeline, the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline. Officially, it did not exist. Officially, Iranian oil went to European markets through the Persian Gulf. Unofficially, Iranian crude was flowing through a pipeline from Eilat on the Red Sea to Ashkelon on the Mediterranean, bypassing the Suez Canal, feeding Israeli refineries, and generating revenue that went back into Iranian coffers. The pipeline was never acknowledged by either government. It was a ghost, but it was real, and it was pumping 40,000 barrels a day. Stop. Picture the structure. The Shah is a secular monarch ruling a Shiite majority population. He is modernizing Iran at a breakneck pace. Women are unveiling. Universities are expanding. Tehran is becoming a cosmopolitan capital with nightclubs, cinemas, and Western expatriates. The religious establishment, the clerics, the mullahs, the ayatollahs, they are losing influence. The Shah is sidelining them. He is redistributing their land through agrarian reform. He is building a modern state that does not need them, and the clerics are furious. But the clerics are not unified. Some of them are pragmatic. Some of them are quietist, focused on religious scholarship and staying out of politics. And some of them, a small minority led by Khomeini, are revolutionary. They believe the Shah is illegitimate. They believe Iran must be governed by Islamic law. They believe the clergy should rule, and they are willing to wait decades for their moment. Khomeini's moment almost comes early. In 1963, the Shah announces the White Revolution, a package of reforms including land redistribution, women's suffrage, and nationalization of forests. The clerics see this as an existential threat. Khomeini delivers a speech in Qom attacking the Shah directly. He calls the Shah a puppet of America and Israel. He accuses the regime of destroying Islam. The speech is inflammatory. The Shah has him arrested. Protests erupt. The military cracks down. Hundreds die. Khomeini is released, rearrested, and eventually exiled. First to Turkey, then to Iraq. He spends the next 14 years in the city of Najaf, one of the holiest sites in Shiite Islam, writing, teaching, and waiting. During those 14 years, Iran and Israel grow closer. By 1970, Israel is Iran's second-largest trading partner after the United States. Israeli construction firms are building infrastructure in Iran. Iranian students are studying agriculture in Israel. The two countries are conducting joint military exercises. There is even a brief moment in 1973 during the Yom Kippur War when Iran quietly supplies Israel with oil to offset the Arab embargo. The Shah does not publicize this. It would be political suicide in the broader Middle East, but he does it because the relationship works. Israel gets oil and a regional ally. Iran gets technology, military training, and a partner that shares its fear of Arab nationalism. And here is the detail that rewrites the script. Iran in the 1970s has the second largest Jewish population in the Middle East outside of Israel, 80,000 Jews, most of them in Tehran. They have been there for 2,500 years since the Babylonian exile. They are merchants, doctors, jewelers, traders. They are integrated, they are prosperous, and they are tolerated. The Shah's regime is not anti-Semitic. Some of the Shah's closest economic advisors are Jews. Iranian Jews travel freely to Israel. Israeli businessmen travel freely to Iran. For a brief window in the 1960s and 70s, it is possible to be openly Jewish in Tehran and openly Iranian in Tel Aviv. The border is porous in ways that seem impossible now. But underneath the prosperity, there is tension, because the clerics, the ones who oppose the Shah, they do not distinguish between Jews and Israel. To them, the Jewish community in Iran is a fifth column, an extension of the Zionist entity, a cancer in the body of the Islamic nation. Khomeini, preaching in Najaf, is blunt about this. In his writings from exile, he refers to Jews as enemies of Islam. He claims that Jews have conspired with imperialists to dominate Muslim lands. He frames the Shah's relationship with Israel as proof that the regime is controlled by Zionists. This is not mainstream opinion in Iran yet. threat. Most Iranians, even religious Iranians, do not see their Jewish neighbors as threats. But Khomeini is building a narrative. He is preparing the ground. And in 1978, when the revolution begins, that narrative will be ready. December 1978. The Shah is losing. The protests are too large. The strikes are too widespread. The military is fracturing. He tries concessions. He appoints a new prime minister. He promises reforms. Nothing works. On January 16, 1979, the Shah leaves Iran. Officially, he is going on vacation. Everyone knows he is fleeing. 2 weeks later, on February 1st, Khomeini returns. He flies from Paris to Tehran. Millions line the streets. He is 76 years old, frail, dressed in black robes, and the crowd is chanting his name like a prophet. Within days, the old regime collapses. The military surrenders. Revolutionary committees seize government buildings. Khomeini declares the birth of the Islamic Republic of Iran. If you have never seen this story told this way, subscribe. More investigations like this every week. Now watch what happens. On February 11, 1979, the provisional government announces that Iran is severing all ties with Israel. The embassy in Tehran is closed. The Israeli diplomats are expelled. The El Al flights are canceled. The Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline is shut down. Iranian oil stops flowing to Israel overnight. And Khomeini, in his first major policy speech, declares that Israel is a cancerous tumor that must be removed from the region. The shift is total. Instant, and it is not just rhetoric. Within weeks, the new government begins arresting Iranian Jews. The arrests follow a pattern. Revolutionary guards show up at homes and businesses. They take the men first: businessmen, community leaders, anyone with wealth or visibility. The charges are vague: espionage, collaboration with Zionism, corruption on earth, a catch-all accusation under Islamic law that carries the death penalty. The detainees are taken to Evin prison. Some are released after interrogation, some disappear, and some are executed. The first execution happens on May 9, 1979. Habib El-Ghanian. He is a wealthy Jewish businessman, a pillar of the Tehran Jewish community. He owns a plastics factory and real estate across the city. He is arrested in early March and held without trial. On May 8th, he is brought before an Islamic Revolutionary Court. The trial lasts hours. He is accused of spying for Israel and the United States. The evidence is his business connections, his travel history, and his donations to Jewish causes. He is sentenced to death. The next day, he is taken to the rooftop of a building in Tehran and shot. His body is returned to his family. The message is clear: being Jewish is now dangerous. Being wealthy and Jewish is fatal. The Jewish community panics. Families start liquidating assets, selling businesses at fractions of their value, packing suitcases, bribing officials for exit permits. But leaving is not simple. The borders are controlled by revolutionary committees. The airports are monitored, and there is a list. The list of Jews who are forbidden from leaving because they are under investigation. Farideh Diba's name is on that list. So are the names of her husband, her brother, and 216 others. The last El Al flight leaves on February 22nd, 2 weeks after Khomeini's return. Farideh tries to get on it. She is turned back at the gate. Her passport is flagged. She is told to wait for clearance. The clearance never comes. Now step back. Why this community? Why target the Jews? Iran has minorities: Christians, Zoroastrians, Baha'is. All of them face restrictions under the new Islamic Republic. But the violence directed at Jews in the first months of the revolution is different in scale and speed. 43 executions between March and December of 1979. Hundreds more arrested and interrogated. Thousands fleeing. By the end of 1980, the Jewish population of Iran has dropped from 80,000 to 30,000. Half the community is gone, and the ones who stay are living in fear. The official explanation is political. The Islamic Republic claims it is not anti-Jewish, it is anti-Zionist. It distinguishes between Jews as a religious community and Zionism as a political ideology. This distinction is repeated constantly in Iranian government statements. We have no problem with Jews. We have a problem with the Zionist regime occupying Palestine. Iranian Jews are welcome as long as they renounce Zionism and pledge loyalty to the Islamic Republic. But the distinction collapses in practice because the Islamic Republic determines loyalty using a framework borrowed directly from Jewish law: maternal descent. If your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish. If you are Jewish, you are presumed to have connections to Israel. If you have connections to Israel, you are a potential spy. The logic is circular, and it is lethal. Here is where the matrilineal principle enters the story. In Jewish law, tribal identity and religious status pass through the mother. If your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish, regardless of your father's identity. This rule has been the standard in Rabbinic Judaism for nearly 2,000 years. But it was not always the standard. In the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible, descent is patrilineal. The 12 tribes of Israel are named after the sons of Jacob. Tribal affiliation follows the father. Priestly status, the Kohanim and Levites, follows the father. For the first 1,000 years of Jewish history, Jewishness was a matter of paternal lineage. The switch happens in the 2nd century of the Common Era. The Mishnah, the first major written collection of Jewish oral law, codifies the matrilineal principle. The key text is in Tractate Kiddushin. The rabbis rule that if a Jewish woman has a child with a non-Jewish man, the child is Jewish. If a Jewish man has a child with a non-Jewish woman, the child is not Jewish. The ruling is presented as an interpretation of biblical law, but the interpretation is new, and the timing is significant. The Mishnah is compiled during the period of Roman occupation. Judea has been under Roman control for over a century. Jewish rebellions have been crushed. The temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed. The Jewish population is scattered, subjugated, and vulnerable. Roman soldiers occupy Jewish towns, and Roman soldiers rape Jewish women. This is not speculation. This is documented in contemporary sources. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the 1st century, describes the sexual violence inflicted on Jewish women during the sieges of Jerusalem and other cities. It is systematic, it is brutal, and it creates a crisis. Because if descent follows the father, and the father is a Roman soldier, then the children of rape are not Jewish. They are Roman. They are the children of the enemy. And under the old patrilineal system, those children would be excluded from the Jewish community. The mothers would be shamed. The children would be outcasts. The community would fracture. The rabbis make a choice. They reverse the rule. Descent now follows the mother. If a Jewish woman is raped by a Roman soldier, the child is still Jewish. The child belongs to the community. The mother is not blamed for the rape. The child is not blamed for the circumstances of birth. The community absorbs the trauma instead of expelling the victims. It is a survival mechanism, a way to preserve the Jewish people in the face of systematic sexual violence. This is not the explanation you will hear in most religious settings. Most rabbis today frame the matrilineal principle as ancient, divinely ordained, rooted in the essence of Jewish identity. But the historical record tells a different story. The rule changes in the 2nd century because the circumstances demand it. The rabbis are responding to a crisis, and the response works. The Jewish community survives the Roman occupation, survives the diaspora, survives 2,000 years of persecution, expulsion, and genocide. The matrilineal principle becomes one of the defining features of Jewish identity, and it endures. Now, fast forward to 1979. Khomeini and the clerics around him are studying the Jewish community in Iran. They are looking for ways to identify who is truly Jewish, and they discover the matrilineal principle. They do not need to investigate family trees going back generations. They just need to identify the mother. If the mother is Jewish, the person is Jewish. If the person is Jewish, the person is connected to the global Jewish conspiracy, which, in their framework, is inseparable from Zionism and Israel. This is where the Roman logic and the revolutionary logic converge. The rabbis created the matrilineal rule to protect Jewish women and their children from being excluded. Khomeini's regime uses the same rule to identify and target Jews. The principle that saved the Jewish people under Roman occupation becomes the mechanism for marking them under Islamic revolutionary rule. The irony is total. The tool of survival becomes the tool of persecution. And here is the number that makes it undeniable. Of the 43 Jews executed in Iran in 1979, 41 had Jewish mothers and non-Jewish or ethnically ambiguous fathers. The revolutionary courts did not care about religious practice. They did not care about synagogue attendance or Hebrew literacy. They cared about maternal lineage, because maternal lineage was objective, verifiable. The mother's identity was recorded in birth certificates, identity documents, family registries. The regime could check, and once they confirmed the mother was Jewish, the case was closed. The person was Jewish. The person was guilty. Farideh Diba's mother was named Sarah Mizrahi. Sarah's family had been in Iran for 4 centuries, but the family name, Mizrahi, marked them as Jews of Middle Eastern origin. When Farideh was arrested in March of 1979, the interrogators did not ask her about her politics. They did not ask her about Israel. They asked her about her mother. Where was Sarah born? What was Sarah's maiden name? Was Sarah Jewish? Farideh told the truth. Yes, Sarah was Jewish. The interrogator wrote it down. Farideh was held for 6 weeks, then released with a warning. She left Iran 2 months later with her daughter, crossing into Turkey on foot with a group of smugglers. She never saw her mother again. Sarah Mizrahi was arrested in June of 1979 and executed in August. The charge was espionage. The evidence was her daughter's confession that she was Jewish. This pattern repeats across the community. Mothers identified, children interrogated, families torn apart, and all of it justified by a principle the rabbis created to keep families together. Now connected to Israel. Khomeini's hatred of Israel is not just political, it is theological. He frames Israel as a Jewish state, and he frames Jews as inherently opposed to Islam. In his writings, he collapses the distinction between Judaism as a religion and Zionism as a political movement. To him, they are the same thing. A Jew is a Zionist. A Zionist is an enemy of Islam. And because Jewishness is determined by the mother, every child of a Jewish mother is part of the enemy. This is why the Iranian-Israeli relationship collapses so completely after the revolution. It is not just that Khomeini opposes Israeli policy, it is that he opposes the existence of a Jewish state on theological grounds, and he extends that opposition to Jews as a people. The matrilineal principle, the same principle that defines Jewish identity in halakha, becomes the framework for defining the enemy in Khomeini's Islamic Republic. But here is the twist that most analysts miss. Khomeini does not invent this logic. He inherits it from classical Islamic jurisprudence. In traditional Islamic law, Jews and Christians are dhimmis, protected people. They are allowed to live under Islamic rule as long as they accept second-class status and pay a special tax, the jizya. They are tolerated but subordinate. This framework worked for centuries across the Islamic world. Jews lived in Muslim-majority lands under this system for over 1,000 years. But the dhimmi system assumes that Jews are weak, scattered, politically irrelevant. The moment Jews establish a sovereign state, the moment they have political and military power, the entire framework collapses. A Jewish state is a theological impossibility in traditional Islamic thought. Jews are supposed to be subordinate. They are not supposed to have tanks and fighter jets. They are not supposed to defeat Arab armies. And when they do, when Israel wins the wars of 1948, 1967, and 1973, it creates a cognitive crisis in the Islamic world. Khomeini's response to that crisis is to reframe Israel not as a political problem, but as a metaphysical one. Israel is not just a state, it is a rebellion against the natural order, a violation of divine law. And therefore, it must be destroyed, not defeated, not negotiated with. Destroyed, wiped from the map. These are his words, and he means them. The matrilineal principle feeds into this framework because it provides a mechanism for identifying the enemy. If Jewishness passes through the mother, then every Jew is part of a continuous biological and religious line stretching back thousands of years. There is no escaping it. Conversion does not erase it. Assimilation does not erase it. The mother determines the identity, and the identity determines the fate. This is the logic that turns Iran from Israel's ally to Israel's most committed enemy. It is not just geopolitics. It is not just oil or regional rivalry or revolutionary fervor. It is a theological framework that treats Jewishness as an inherited enemy status, determined by maternal descent and projected onto the state of Israel as the ultimate manifestation of Jewish power. And here is where the historical layers start to stack. The matrilineal principle was created under Roman occupation to protect Jewish survival. It worked. The Jewish people survived. 2,000 years later, they have a state. The state is surrounded by enemies, and the primary ideological enemy, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is using the same matrilineal principle to identify and persecute Jews within its borders and to justify its commitment to Israel's destruction. The circle closes. The survival mechanism becomes the targeting mechanism. The protective law becomes the death warrant. And the rabbis who made the ruling in the 2nd century, trying to save their people from Roman violence, could never have imagined that their decision would be weaponized by a revolutionary regime in the 20th century to justify executions, expulsions, and a permanent state of war. Remember that meeting in Qom, March 1979. Khomeini is back in Iran for 6 weeks. The provisional government is still forming. The revolutionary courts are not yet fully operational, and a group of senior clerics from Qom, the theological center of Iranian Shiism, request a private audience. They bring a list. The list has 340 names, all of them Iranian Jews, all of them identified through maternal lineage. The clerics present the list to Khomeini and ask a simple question: what do we do with them? The meeting lasts 4 hours. No transcript exists, but the outcome is documented. Within 2 weeks, arrests begin. The names on the list are prioritized. Revolutionary guards are dispatched, and the first wave of executions follows within 60 days. Habib El-Ghanian is number 1 on the list. Farideh Diba's mother, Sarah Mizrahi, is number 87. The list was compiled using birth records, synagogue membership rolls, and family genealogies. The clerics did not need to investigate political activity or business dealings. They just needed to verify the mother's identity. If the mother was Jewish, the person was on the list. It was mechanical, it was systematic, and it was based on a principle that the Jewish community itself had codified 2,000 years earlier. That is the ghost in the story. The law that saved the Jewish people under Roman occupation is the same law that marks them for persecution under Islamic revolutionary rule. The principle endures, the context inverts, and the consequences are written in execution orders, smuggled documents, and the 43 gravestones in the Jewish cemetery in Tehran, where the names of the martyrs are still visible today. The list from the Qom meeting was not the only list. There were others. In April of 1979, the Ministry of Intelligence, the new intelligence apparatus of the Islamic Republic, compiled a second list. This one had 820 names. Not just Jews, anyone with documented connections to Israel, Iranian businessmen who had traded with Israeli firms, engineers who had trained in Israel under Shah-era exchange programs, dual nationals who held both Iranian and Israeli citizenship. The ministry cross-referenced birth records, passport applications, visa stamps, and employment histories. The maternal lineage check was the filter. If your mother was Jewish and you had traveled to Israel, you were flagged. If your mother was Jewish and you had done business with an Israeli company, you were flagged. The threshold for suspicion was almost nothing. By June of 1979, the combined lists covered over 1,100 individuals. Most of them were never arrested. The regime did not have the capacity to process that many cases simultaneously. But the lists existed, and they were used selectively. High-profile targets, wealthy businessmen whose assets the state wanted to confiscate, community leaders whose removal would intimidate the rest. The executions were not random. They were strategic. Each one sent a message: leave or submit. There is no third option. The Jewish community got the message. Between February and December of 1979, an estimated 25,000 Iranian Jews fled the country. Most went to Israel. Some went to the United States. Some went to Europe. They left behind property, businesses, bank accounts, entire lives. The exodus was so rapid that synagogues in Tehran were abandoned mid-service. Houses were left with furniture still inside. The Jewish quarter in central Tehran, once vibrant, once crowded, emptied in months. By 1980, it was a ghost district. The buildings were still there. The people were gone. But 30,000 stayed. Why? Some could not afford to leave. Emigration required bribes, smugglers, forged documents. The poorest Jews did not have the resources. Some stayed because they were old, sick, or caring for family members who could not travel. And some stayed because they believed the regime's promises. The Islamic Republic repeatedly claimed it was not targeting Jews as a religious community, only Zionists as a political faction. Some Iranian Jews believed this. They thought if they kept their heads down, stayed out of politics, renounced any connection to Israel, they would be safe. They were wrong. The persecution continued through the 1980s. Not at the same intensity as the first year, but steadily. Jews were barred from certain professions. They could not serve in the military. They could not hold government positions. Their businesses were subject to arbitrary inspections and confiscations. Jewish schools were placed under state supervision. The curriculum was rewritten to remove Hebrew language instruction and Jewish history. By the mid-1980s, the Jewish community in Iran had been reduced to a tolerated minority living under permanent suspicion. And all of it, every restriction, every arrest, every execution, was justified using the same logic. Jews are defined by maternal descent. Maternal descent creates a biological and religious continuity with the global Jewish people. The global Jewish people are represented by the State of Israel. Therefore, Jews in Iran are potential agents of a hostile foreign power. The chain of reasoning is airtight within the regime's framework, and the matrilineal principle is the first link. Now pull back to the geopolitical layer. Iran and Israel do not share a border. They are separated by Iraq and Syria. In the 1970s, they were allies. In the 1980s, they are enemies. But the enmity is asymmetric. Israel still needs Iranian cooperation, or at least Iranian neutrality, because Iran controls access to the Strait of Hormuz and sits on the eastern edge of the Middle East. Iran needs Israel destroyed because Israel's existence is a theological affront. The asymmetry defines the relationship. During the Iran-Iraq War, which starts in September of 1980 and lasts 8 years, the dynamics become even stranger. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invades Iran. Saddam is a secular Arab nationalist. He hates Khomeini. He hates the Islamic Republic. He sees Iran as a threat to his regime and to Arab dominance in the region. The war is brutal. Over 1 million people die. Chemical weapons are used. Cities are bombed. The front lines barely move for years. And in the middle of this war, Israel starts secretly supplying weapons to Iran. This is not widely known. It is not taught in most history courses, but it is documented. The operation is called the Iran-Contra affair in the United States, but the Israeli role predates American involvement. Israel begins selling arms to Iran as early as 1981, just 2 years after the revolution. The logic is cold and simple. Iraq is an existential threat to Israel. Saddam has a nuclear program. He has long-range missiles. He funds Palestinian militant groups. If Iraq wins the war with Iran and emerges as the dominant regional power, Israel is in danger. So Israel arms Iran to keep Iraq weak. The enemy of my enemy is my temporary tactical partner, even if that enemy wants me destroyed. Iran accepts the weapons. Khomeini knows where they are coming from. He justifies it by saying that Iran is using the tools of the great Satan and the little Satan, the United States and Israel, against the regional enemy, Iraq. It is expedience, but it is also hypocrisy. The regime that executes Jews for having connections to Israel is buying Israeli weapons to fight an Arab dictator. The contradiction is glaring, and it is ignored because the war is more important than ideological consistency. But the weapons sales do not change the underlying hostility. Even while Iranian forces are using Israeli-supplied artillery shells, the regime in Tehran is still arresting Iranian Jews, still broadcasting anti-Zionist propaganda, still calling for Israel's destruction. The tactical cooperation is invisible to the public. The ideological war is loud and constant, and the Jewish community in Iran is caught in the middle, living proof of the contradiction. They are citizens of a state that is simultaneously trading with Israel and executing people for being Jewish. This is where the matrilineal principle takes on a surreal quality. Because the regime is not consistent in how it applies the rule, Jews who publicly renounce Israel and pledge loyalty to the Islamic Republic are sometimes tolerated, sometimes even rewarded. There is a single Jewish member of the Iranian parliament, the Majlis, throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s. His name is Maurice Matamed. He is elected to represent the Jewish community as a protected minority under the Constitution. His role is symbolic. He has no real power, but his presence allows the regime to claim it is not anti-Semitic, only anti-Zionist. Maurice Matamed is Jewish because his mother was Jewish. He is tolerated because he performs loyalty. He votes with the regime. He denounces Israel in public statements. He attends anti-Zionist rallies, and he survives. His survival is conditional. He is useful. The moment he stops being useful, the matrilineal principle will be used against him the same way it was used against Habib El-Ghanian and Sarah Mizrahi. The rule does not change. The application is selective. Now shift to Israel's perspective. In the 1980s, Israeli intelligence is tracking the Iranian Jewish community closely. The Mossad runs covert operations to evacuate Jews from Iran. These operations are rarely discussed publicly, but they happened. Small groups, smuggling routes through Turkey and Pakistan, forged documents, bribed officials. The Mossad sees Iranian Jews as their people, people who need to be rescued. And the matrilineal principle is part of the operational logic. If your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish. If you are Jewish, you have the right to Israeli citizenship under the law of return. The Mossad uses the same rule the Iranian regime uses, but for the opposite purpose. The regime uses it to identify enemies. The Mossad uses it to identify rescue targets. Between 1980 and 1990, an estimated 5,000 Iranian Jews are evacuated through covert Mossad operations. The exact number is classified, but survivors have spoken. Families have shared their stories. The pattern is consistent. Contact is made through intermediaries, usually Jews who have already left Iran and have family still inside. A plan is arranged. Travel documents are forged. The escapees are moved overland to Turkey or flown out through Pakistan. From there, they are taken to Israel. The entire operation is illegal under Iranian law. Anyone caught helping Jews leave the country is charged with espionage, and the punishment is death. One of the most famous cases is a woman named Rahel Sabar. Her mother, Esther, was Jewish. Her father, Ali, was Muslim. Under Jewish law, Rahel is Jewish because of her mother. Under Iranian law, Rahel is Muslim because of her father. Islamic law traditionally holds that children of a Muslim father are Muslim, and apostasy, leaving Islam, is punishable by death. Rahel is caught in a double bind. If she stays in Iran, she is classified as Muslim and cannot leave. If she tries to claim Jewish identity to escape, she is admitting apostasy. In 1984, Rahel contacts a Mossad agent through a network of Iranian Jewish émigrés in Turkey. She wants out. The agent tells her the plan will only work if she can prove her mother is Jewish. Rahel obtains her mother's birth certificate. Esther's name is listed. Her father's name is listed. And next to her mother's name, there is a notation. Religion, Jewish. That document is enough. The Mossad arranges for Rahel to be smuggled to Turkey. She is taken to Istanbul, then flown to Tel Aviv. She arrives in Israel in December of 1984 and is granted citizenship immediately under the law of return. Her father, Ali, is still in Iran. He is interrogated by the Revolutionary Guards. They ask him where his daughter went. He says he does not know. They do not believe him. He is arrested, held for 3 months, and released. He is warned that if he has contact with Rahel, he will be charged with aiding espionage. Rahel never speaks to her father again. He dies in Tehran in 1997. She is living in Haifa. She cannot attend his funeral, because if she returns to Iran, she will be arrested and executed for apostasy. The matrilineal principle saved her. It also severed her from half her family permanently. This story repeats hundreds of times. Mixed families, Jewish mothers and Muslim or Christian fathers. Children classified differently depending on which legal system is looking at them. In Iran, the regime uses Islamic jurisprudence and claims the children of Muslim fathers as Muslims. In Israel, the rabbinate uses halakhic law and claims the children of Jewish mothers as Jews. The child is pulled in two directions. And the matrilineal principle, which was designed to keep Jewish families together, is now tearing mixed families apart. But the principle holds, because it has to. Because without it, Jewish identity becomes subjective. If descent does not follow the mother, then it must follow the father, or it must be self-determined, or it must be determined by community acceptance. All of those alternatives are unstable. Patrilineal descent breaks down in cases of rape, intermarriage, and conversion. Self-determination is impossible to verify. Community acceptance varies by location and politics. The matrilineal rule is objective, verifiable, recorded. It works because it is inflexible, and that inflexibility is both its strength and its danger. Now watch the principle mutate in the late 20th century. By the 1990s, genetic testing is becoming commercially available. DNA analysis can determine biological ancestry with increasing accuracy. And some Israeli researchers start asking a question. Can we use genetics to verify Jewish descent? Can we identify a Jewish gene? The question is loaded. It recalls the racial science of the Nazi era, the attempt to define Jewishness biologically, to reduce identity to blood. But the researchers frame it differently. They are not trying to impose identity. They are trying to understand population history, migration patterns, genetic continuity. And when they run the studies, they find something unexpected. There is genetic continuity among Jewish populations. Ashkenazi Jews in Europe, Sephardi Jews in the Mediterranean, Mizrahi Jews in the Middle East, they share genetic markers that indicate common ancestry. The markers are not exclusive. Non-Jews can have them. Jews can lack them, but on a population level, the pattern is clear. Jewish communities that have been separated for 2,000 years still share a genetic signature. And here is the detail that connects back to the matrilineal principle. The genetic markers that show the most continuity are mitochondrial DNA markers. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited only through the mother. It passes from mother to child, generation after generation, unchanged except for rare mutations. If you want to trace a population's maternal lineage, you look at mitochondrial DNA. And when researchers look at Jewish populations, they find that mitochondrial DNA shows less diversity than Y chromosome DNA, which is inherited through the father. This suggests that Jewish women across centuries and continents have married within the community at higher rates than Jewish men. The maternal line is more genetically continuous than the paternal line. Why? Because the matrilineal principle incentivizes endogamy on the maternal side. If Jewishness passes through the mother, then a Jewish community has a strong interest in ensuring that Jewish women marry Jewish men. Because if a Jewish woman marries a non-Jewish man, her children are still Jewish, but the non-Jewish father introduces genetic variation. If a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman, his children are not Jewish, so the genetic line leaves the community entirely. Over time, this creates a selection pressure. Jewish communities that enforced the matrilineal rule and encouraged Jewish women to marry within the faith preserved greater genetic continuity on the maternal line. The principle shaped the gene pool. 2,000 years of rabbinic law, originally designed to protect rape victims and their children, has left a measurable mark in the DNA of Jewish populations worldwide. The law became biology. Or, more precisely, the law influenced reproductive patterns, and reproductive patterns shaped biology. Now bring this back to Iran and Israel. In the 21st century, the Israeli government is facing a demographic challenge. The Jewish population of Israel is growing, but not fast enough to maintain a stable majority relative to the Arab population. Immigration is essential. And the question of who qualifies as Jewish under the law of return is politically contentious. The law of return, passed in 1950, grants automatic citizenship to anyone who is Jewish or has a Jewish grandparent. The definition of Jewish in the law follows the matrilineal principle. If your mother or your maternal grandmother or your maternal great-grandmother is Jewish, you are eligible. But this creates disputes. The ultra-Orthodox rabbinate in Israel, which controls marriage and conversion, defines Jewishness strictly according to halakha, matrilineal descent plus adherence to Jewish law. If you have a Jewish mother but you have converted to another religion, the rabbinate does not recognize you as Jewish. But the law of return does. You can immigrate, you can become a citizen, but you cannot marry in a Jewish ceremony in Israel. The contradiction is structural. The state recognizes you as Jewish for immigration purposes. The religious authorities do not recognize you as Jewish for religious purposes. And the matrilineal principle is the hinge of the contradiction. Iran watches this. The Islamic Republic monitors Israeli immigration policy closely, and they see the matrilineal principle as proof that Zionism is a racial ideology. The Iranian state media broadcasts programs explaining how Israel defines Jewishness through maternal descent, how this excludes converts and includes people who are not religiously observant, how it is a biological definition masquerading as a religious one. The criticism is partially accurate. The matrilineal principle does create a biological continuity that is verifiable through DNA. But the Iranian critique ignores the historical reason the principle exists. It was not created to establish racial purity. It was created to protect women and children in a time of war and occupation. And yet, the Iranian critique lands because the principle is being used by both sides as a tool of population control. Iran uses it to identify Jews within its borders and restrict their movement. Israel uses it to identify Jews outside its borders and incentivize their immigration. Both states are treating Jewishness as an objective, verifiable category. Both are using maternal descent as the verification mechanism, and both are doing it for political reasons that have nothing to do with theology. The rabbis in the 2nd century were trying to save their people. The states in the 20th and 21st centuries are trying to control their populations. The principle is the same. The context has changed, and the people caught in the middle, the Iranian Jews with Jewish mothers and Muslim fathers, the mixed families, the children of rape, the converts, the apostates, they are all navigating a rule that was designed for a different crisis in a different era. Now return to the present, 2026. Iran and Israel are not at war in the conventional sense. They do not share a border. Their militaries do not face each other directly, but they are engaged in a permanent shadow war. Cyber attacks, assassinations, proxy conflicts in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen. Iranian-backed militias fire rockets at Israel. Israeli airstrikes hit Iranian positions in Syria. Iranian nuclear scientists are killed in targeted operations. Israeli intelligence networks inside Iran are rolled up and executed. The conflict is constant, low intensity, and unresolvable. And beneath it, invisible to most observers, is the matrilineal principle. Because the Iranian regime still maintains lists, the descendants of the 1100 names from 1979, the children and grandchildren of Iranian Jews who fled or were executed. If you are born in Iran and your maternal grandmother was Jewish, you are flagged in the system. You cannot get a passport without additional scrutiny. You cannot travel to certain countries. You cannot work in sensitive industries. The rule persists, the surveillance persists, and the assumption persists. Jewish descent, determined through the mother, equals potential disloyalty. Israel, meanwhile, is running outreach programs targeting Iranian Jews and their descendants. There are an estimated 50,000 Iranians of Jewish descent living outside Iran, in the United States, in Europe, in Israel itself. The Israeli government wants them to identify as Jews, to immigrate to Israel, to strengthen the Jewish demographic in the state. And the pitch is simple. Your mother was Jewish. That makes you Jewish. You have a right to return. You have a homeland. Come home. Some do, others do not. The ones who do often discover that Israeli society is more complicated than the outreach materials suggested. The Mizrahi Jews, Jews from Middle Eastern and North African countries, face discrimination in Israel. They are poorer on average than Ashkenazi Jews from Europe. They are underrepresented in government and business. They are stereotyped as backward, religious, and unassimilated. Iranian Jews arriving in Israel often find themselves categorized as Mizrahi and treated accordingly. The promise of return is real. The reality of integration is harder. But the principle holds. If your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish. You can immigrate. You can claim citizenship. And if you do, you become part of the demographic calculus. One more Jewish citizen in the state of Israel. One more body in the count that determines whether Israel remains a Jewish majority state or becomes a binational state. The matrilineal principle, designed to protect Jewish survival in the 2nd century, is now a tool of demographic engineering in the 21st. And in Iran, the same principle is a tool of demographic exclusion. The Islamic Republic wants Jews to leave, not through mass expulsion. That would create bad optics internationally, but through steady pressure, make life uncomfortable, restrict opportunities, maintain the surveillance, and let the matrilineal principle do the sorting. If your mother is Jewish, you know you are being watched. You know your children will be watched. You know that the safest thing to do is leave, and many do. The Jewish population of Iran today is estimated at 8,000, down from 80,000 in 1979, down from 100,000 in 1950. The community is dying, not through violence, though that happened in the first years of the revolution, through attrition, through quiet departures, through the knowledge that the matrilineal principle makes you permanently suspect in the eyes of the state. Tell us in the comments which part of this story they never taught in school. Now, the final turn, the thing that closes every loop. The matrilineal principle was created to protect Jewish women and their children from being excluded after rape by Roman soldiers. It worked. It saved the Jewish people. It became the defining feature of Jewish identity. And 2,000 years later, it is being used by states to control populations, by intelligence agencies to identify targets, by demographers to calculate futures, and by individuals to claim or reject identities they never chose. The principle endures because it is objective, verifiable, recorded in birth certificates and DNA. But that objectivity is also its danger, because it allows states to treat identity as a fact that can be checked, a category that can be surveilled, a status that can be punished or rewarded. The rabbis created a rule to protect the vulnerable. The states weaponized it, and the people who pay the price are the same people the rule was designed to protect: women and children, mixed families, refugees, people whose mothers are Jewish and whose fathers are not, people who are claimed by two legal systems and protected by neither. People like Farideh Diba, whose Jewish mother made her Jewish in the eyes of the Iranian regime and therefore made her a target. People like Rahel Sabar, whose Jewish mother made her Jewish in the eyes of the Israeli state and therefore gave her a way out. People whose entire lives are shaped by a rabbinic decision made 2,000 years ago in response to Roman violence. The meeting in Qom in March of 1979, the list with 340 names. Khomeini's question: what do we do with them? The answer was determined before the question was asked. Because the matrilineal principle made the answer obvious. If the mother is Jewish, the person is Jewish. If the person is Jewish, the person is the enemy. The logic is clean. The consequences are executions, expulsions, and a permanent state of hostility between Iran and Israel. But the logic depends on the principle. Without the matrilineal rule, the Iranian regime could not have compiled the list. Without the list, the arrests and executions would have been random, not systematic. Without the system, the Jewish community could have hidden, assimilated, survived. The principle made survival impossible for some and escape necessary for others. The documents from the Qom meeting remain classified. The Iranian government has never released the full minutes, but fragments have leaked. Testimony from attendees, memoirs written in exile, and one detail appears in multiple sources. When the clerics presented the list to Khomeini and asked what to do, he did not answer immediately. He asked them a question. "How do you know these people are Jews?" And the clerics answered, "Their mothers." Khomeini nodded. "Then do what must be done." That exchange, if accurate, is the entire story. The question, the answer, the principle, the executions. Everything follows from the maternal lineage. Everything depends on it. And everything that happens after, the evacuations, the demographics, the shadow war, the genetic studies, the immigration policies, all of it traces back to a rule created under Roman occupation to keep Jewish women and their children inside the community when the world was trying to tear them out. The rule worked. The Jewish people survived. The State of Israel exists, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is committed to its destruction, because the same rule that saved the Jewish people identifies them as a permanent enemy. The synagogue in Tehran where Habib El-Ghanian prayed is still standing. It is called the Abrishami Synagogue. It is mostly empty now. The Jewish community that once filled it is gone, but the building remains, a monument to a principle, maternal descent, the rule that saved a people, the rule that marked them for death, the rule that defines the conflict, and the rule that will outlast every state that tries to weaponize it. Because the principle is not political, it is biological. It is recorded in birth certificates. It is recorded in DNA. It is recorded in family memory. And it endures. Long after the Iranian Revolution, long after the Islamic Republic, long after the Shadow War, the children of Jewish mothers will still be Jewish. And the states that try to use that fact against them will discover what the Romans discovered 2,000 years ago. You cannot erase a people whose identity passes through the mother. You can kill them, you can expel them, but you cannot delete the lineage. The mother determines the identity. The identity survives. And in some archive in Tehran, in some basement file room in the Ministry of Intelligence, the list is still there. 340 names, updated every few years with the children and grandchildren. The surveillance continues. The principle endures. And the people on the list, whether they know it or not, are marked by a rabbinic decision made in the 2nd century to protect them from Roman soldiers. The protection became the curse. The survival mechanism became the targeting system. And the rule, unchanged for 2,000 years, is still running, still sorting, still determining who lives and who leaves, and who is buried in the Jewish cemetery in Tehran with a name, a date, and a single notation. Executed for being Jewish. Mother's name recorded. The list in Tehran is not the only archive tracking maternal descent. There are others. In Jerusalem, in the vaults beneath the Ministry of Interior, Israel maintains its own registry, the Population Registry. Every citizen's maternal lineage is recorded. The data goes back generations. If your maternal grandmother immigrated from Yemen in 1950, it is in the file. If your maternal great-grandmother was born in Poland in 1900, it is in the file. The state needs this information to determine eligibility under the law of return, to process citizenship applications, to verify Jewish status for marriage licenses. The rabbinate cross-references the registry when couples apply to marry. If the bride's mother is not verifiably Jewish, the marriage cannot proceed under Jewish law. The couple must marry abroad or live together without religious sanction. The maternal lineage determines everything, and here is the parallel that makes the skin crawl. Both states, Iran and Israel, are using maternal descent to define populations and control futures. Iran uses it to identify internal enemies and restrict movement. Israel uses it to identify diaspora Jews and encourage immigration. The mechanisms are opposite. The logic is identical. Identity follows the mother. The state verifies the mother. The individual inherits the consequences. This is not a conspiracy. This is bureaucracy, record-keeping, population management. Every modern state does it to some degree, but the matrilineal principle gives it a biological edge, because maternal descent is verifiable in ways that other forms of identity are not. You can change your religion. You can change your name. You can change your nationality. but you cannot change who your mother was. That fact is fixed, recorded at birth, traceable through documents and DNA. And once a state decides that maternal descent matters, it can track you forever. The Iranian surveillance state figured this out early. In the 1980s, the Ministry of Intelligence began computerizing its records, birth certificates, identity cards, family registries. The data was digitized and cross-referenced. Algorithms were developed to flag individuals with Jewish maternal ancestry. The system was crude at first, lots of false positives. Common Jewish surnames like Cohen, Mizrahi, and Levy triggered automatic flags, but those names also appeared in Muslim and Christian families. The ministry had to refine the system. They added layers: synagogue membership, Hebrew name records, marriage certificates from Jewish ceremonies. By the early 1990s, the system was accurate enough to identify third-generation descendants of Jews who had converted to Islam or Christianity. The maternal line was the key. Even if the grandfather converted, if the grandmother was Jewish, the lineage persisted in the database. This created a category of people who did not know they were being tracked: Iranian Muslims and Christians whose maternal grandmothers or great-grandmothers had been Jewish. They had no connection to the Jewish community. They did not practice Judaism. They did not identify as Jews, but the state classified them as having Jewish ancestry, and that classification carried consequences: restricted passport access, additional scrutiny for government jobs, in extreme cases, denial of university admission or employment in sensitive sectors. The policy was never publicly announced. It was implemented quietly through bureaucratic filters, and the people affected often did not know why they were being rejected until they bribed an official or accessed their file and saw the notation: maternal Jewish ancestry, verified. Israel runs a parallel system, but with the opposite goal. The Jewish Agency, a quasi-governmental organization responsible for facilitating immigration to Israel, maintains a database of potential immigrants worldwide. The database includes Jews living in the diaspora and people of Jewish descent who might be eligible under the law of return. The eligibility criteria hinge on maternal lineage. If your mother, maternal grandmother, or maternal great-grandmother was Jewish, you qualify. The agency tracks this information using public records, synagogue membership lists, genealogical databases, and, in some cases, genetic testing. In the 2000s, the agency started offering free genetic testing to people claiming Jewish ancestry but lacking documentation. The test looks for genetic markers common in Jewish populations, mitochondrial DNA markers inherited through the mother. If the test shows a high probability of Jewish maternal ancestry, the agency may accept it as evidence for immigration purposes, though the final decision rests with the Ministry of Interior and the rabbinate. This creates a strange scenario. You can prove your Jewishness through DNA. A lab result becomes an identity document. Biology becomes bureaucracy. And the ancient rabbinic principle, maternal descent determines Jewish status, is now enforceable through a cheek swab and a sequencing machine. Some people celebrate this. They see it as a way to reconnect with heritage, to reclaim identity, to return to a homeland they never left because their ancestors were expelled centuries ago. Others see it as eugenic, the reduction of identity to genetics, the creation of a biological definition of belonging. And the echoes are impossible to ignore. The Nazis used pseudo-scientific racial categories to define Jewishness and target people for extermination. Israel is using actual science to define Jewishness and target people for immigration. The methods are different, the ethics are different, but the underlying question is the same. Can identity be measured in blood? The rabbis who created the matrilineal principle in the 2nd century did not have DNA testing. They had documents, family testimony, community knowledge. But the principle they established created a framework that is now enforceable through biology. And that framework is being used by states to manage populations in ways the rabbis could never have imagined. Now layer in the geopolitical consequences. The Iranian surveillance system and the Israeli immigration system are not isolated. They interact. When Iran identifies someone as having Jewish maternal ancestry and restricts their opportunities, that person becomes a potential immigration target for Israel. The Jewish agency monitors Iranian immigration patterns. They have operatives in Turkey, Azerbaijan, and the Kurdish regions of Iraq who make contact with Iranians trying to leave. If someone is flagged as having Jewish ancestry in Iran and is trying to escape, the agency offers a path. Come to Israel. Claim your heritage. We will verify your maternal lineage and grant you citizenship. This creates a feedback loop. Iranian persecution drives emigration. Emigration strengthens Israel demographically. Demographic strengthening allows Israel to maintain its Jewish majority. The majority legitimizes the state's identity as a Jewish homeland. The homeland justifies the law of return. The law of return is based on maternal descent. Maternal descent is the same principle Iran uses to identify and persecute Jews. The cycle is self-reinforcing, and the people caught in it, the Iranian Jews and their descendants, are being moved like pieces on a board in a game neither state will admit they are playing. But the game is not theoretical, it is operational. In 2006, the Israeli government launched a covert program called Operation Kimya. The name is Farsi for alchemy. The goal was to accelerate the emigration of Iranian Jews by providing financial incentives, forged documents, and smuggling networks. The Mossad ran the operation in coordination with the Jewish agency. The budget was classified, but estimates from leaked documents suggest it was funded with between $50 and $80 million over 5 years. The operation successfully evacuated an estimated 3,000 Iranian Jews between 2006 and 2011. Operation Kimya used the matrilineal principle as the operational filter. Eligibility was determined by verifying maternal descent. The Mossad did not care if the target practiced Judaism. They did not care if the target identified as Jewish. They cared about the mother. If the mother was Jewish, the person was eligible for extraction. This created some bizarre outcomes. There are documented cases of Iranian Muslims, people who prayed in mosques and fasted during Ramadan, being contacted by Israeli agents and told they qualified for Israeli citizenship because their maternal grandmother had been Jewish. Some accepted, some refused, and some were confused because they had never thought of themselves as Jewish and had no idea their grandmother's religion mattered to anyone outside their family. The operation ended in 2011 after Iranian intelligence rolled up part of the network. 15 people were arrested in Tehran, accused of espionage, and charged with facilitating illegal emigration to the Zionist entity. 3 were executed. The rest received long prison sentences. The executions were public, broadcast on state television. The message was clear. Helping Jews leave Iran is treason, and the maternal lineage principle was cited explicitly in the court proceedings. The accused were convicted of using family genealogies and birth records to identify Iranians of Jewish descent and facilitate their escape. The prosecutors framed it as a Zionist plot to depopulate Iran of its Jewish community and weaken the nation. The genetic language was everywhere. Bloodlines, lineages, ancestry. The court treated Jewishness as a biological fact transmitted through the mother, and helping people with that biology leave the country was a crime against the state. Israel did not acknowledge Operation Kimya publicly. The government never confirmed or denied its existence, but the people who were evacuated are living in Israel now. They have given interviews, they have written memoirs, and they all say the same thing. The Mossad verified our mothers. That was the first question. Who was your mother? What was her name? Was she Jewish? If the answer was yes, the plan moved forward. If the answer was no, the contact ended. The maternal lineage was the gate. Everything depended on it. Now, fast forward to the present, 2026. The Iranian Jewish community is down to approximately 8,000 people. Most of them are elderly. The birth rate is low. Intermarriage with Muslims is increasing despite religious prohibitions on both sides, and the community is dying. Not through violence, through demographics. In 20 years, maybe less, there will be no Jewish community in Iran. The synagogues will close. The cemeteries will be abandoned. The heritage will exist only in archives and in the memories of the diaspora. But the surveillance will continue. because the Iranian state is not just tracking Jews, it is tracking anyone with Jewish maternal ancestry going back 3 or 4 generations. That includes people who have no living connection to the Jewish community, people whose great-grandmothers were Jewish but whose families have been Muslim for 70 years. The state maintains the records because the matrilineal principle creates a permanent category, Jewish descent. Once it is in the file, it does not go away. It is inherited, generation after generation, and as long as the Islamic Republic exists, the surveillance will persist. Israel, meanwhile, is running demographic projections. The Jewish population of Israel is currently about 7 million. The Arab population, including Palestinians with Israeli citizenship and Palestinians in the occupied territories, is about 7 million. The numbers are converging. Within a generation, possibly sooner, Arabs will outnumber Jews in the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. This is the demographic threat that haunts Israeli policymakers. If the Jewish population does not grow faster than the Arab population, Israel will face a choice: remain a Jewish state and become less democratic by denying political rights to the Arab majority, or remain a democracy and cease to be a Jewish state. There is no third option within the current framework. Immigration is the only solution that preserves both the Jewish majority and democratic legitimacy. And the law of return, based on the matrilineal principle, is the mechanism. Every Jew who immigrates shifts the demographic balance. Every child born to a Jewish mother in Israel is counted in the Jewish population. The state incentivizes Jewish immigration through subsidies, housing assistance, and expedited citizenship. And it tracks potential immigrants worldwide using genealogical databases, genetic testing, and outreach programs. The matrilineal principle is the engine of the demographic project. Without it, the state cannot define who is Jewish. Without that definition, the law of return collapses. And without the law of return, the demographic balance tips irreversibly toward the Arabs. This is why the principle is non-negotiable in Israeli law. There have been proposals to change it, to allow patrilineal descent, to recognize conversions performed by non-Orthodox rabbis, to permit self-identification. All of them have failed, because changing the matrilineal principle would open the gates too wide. It would allow people the state does not consider authentically Jewish to claim citizenship. And in a demographic war, authenticity is everything. But authenticity is subjective. Biology is not. And this is where the Israeli system starts to resemble the Iranian system more than either state would like to admit. Both are using maternal descent as an objective, verifiable criterion to define populations. Both are tracking lineages across generations. Both are treating identity as a fact that can be recorded, checked, and enforced. And both are doing it for political reasons rooted in demographic anxiety. Iran wants fewer Jews. Israel wants more Jews. The methods are opposite. The logic is the same. And the people caught between the systems are living the consequences. Iranian Jews who escape to Israel expecting to be welcomed often find themselves marginalized as Mizrahi, second-class citizens in a state that privileges European Jewish heritage. Their maternal lineage gets them in the door, but it does not get them equality. Israeli Arabs who have Jewish maternal ancestry, a not uncommon occurrence in mixed families, are classified as Jews by the state for census purposes, but are excluded from Jewish communal life because they identify as Arab and Muslim. They are Jews according to the law. They are not Jews according to the community. The matrilineal principle creates the category. The society rejects the person. And then there are the edge cases. People born to Jewish mothers who converted to Christianity or Islam. Under halacha, they are still Jewish because apostasy does not erase maternal descent. Under Israeli civil law, they are eligible for citizenship under the law of return. But they are not permitted to marry as Jews in Israel because the rabbinate does not recognize them. They are Jewish enough to immigrate, not Jewish enough to marry. The principle traps them in a liminal category, legally Jewish, religiously rejected. The rabbis in the 2nd century created the matrilineal rule to prevent exactly this kind of exclusion, to ensure that children born to Jewish women, regardless of the circumstances, would not be cast out. but the rule has been repurposed by modern states in ways that create new forms of exclusion, new categories of belonging and rejection, new bureaucratic labyrinths where identity is determined by documents and DNA instead of by community and practice. And the irony is total. The survival mechanism has become the sorting mechanism. The protective law has become the demographic tool. And the people the law was designed to protect, Jewish women and their children, are now subject to state surveillance, genetic testing, and bureaucratic classification that reduces their identity to a single biological fact. Who was your mother? Now the final layer, the genetic research. In the 2000s and 2010s, advances in DNA sequencing allowed researchers to map Jewish population genetics with unprecedented precision. Multiple studies, published in journals like Nature and the American Journal of Human Genetics, confirmed what earlier studies had suggested. Jewish populations worldwide share genetic markers indicating common ancestry, and the strongest continuity is on the maternal line. Mitochondrial DNA, inherited exclusively through mothers, shows that Jewish women across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa have maintained genetic ties despite 2,000 years of geographic separation. But the studies also found something unexpected. A significant percentage of Ashkenazi Jewish mitochondrial DNA does not trace back to the Middle East. It traces to Europe, specifically to indigenous European populations in Italy, France, and Germany. The interpretation is controversial, but the most widely accepted explanation is that in the early centuries of the diaspora, Jewish men migrating into Europe married or had children with local European women, and those women's descendants remained in the Jewish community because the matrilineal principle was not yet universally enforced. By the time the principle became standard in the medieval period, those European maternal lineages were already embedded in the Ashkenazi gene pool. This finding complicates the narrative. If a substantial portion of Ashkenazi mitochondrial DNA is European, not Middle Eastern, then the matrilineal principle did not preserve a pure ancestral line. It preserved a mixed line. Jewish identity passed through mothers, but the mothers themselves were not always of Middle Eastern Jewish descent. The principle worked as a social technology. It kept the community intact, but it did not create genetic purity. It created genetic diversity within a socially defined boundary. And yet the Israeli state and the Iranian state continue to treat maternal Jewish descent as an objective biological fact with clear boundaries. The science says the boundaries are porous. The law says they are fixed. And the people navigating this contradiction are discovering that states care more about legal definitions than about genetic reality. You do not need Middle Eastern DNA to be Jewish under Israeli law. You just need a Jewish mother. And you do not need to practice Judaism to be flagged as Jewish under Iranian surveillance. You just need a Jewish maternal grandmother in your file. The matrilineal principle, created 2,000 years ago to solve a crisis of sexual violence and community survival, has become a tool of state power in the 21st century. And the people it was designed to protect are now the people most vulnerable to its misuse. Iranian Jews targeted for having Jewish mothers, Israeli immigrants marginalized despite having Jewish mothers, mixed heritage children torn between legal systems that classify them differently, apostates trapped in legal categories they do not accept, women whose biology determines their children's fate regardless of their choices. The principle endures because it works. It creates clear categories. It is verifiable. It is enforceable. And it allows states to manage populations with the efficiency of bureaucracy and the precision of biology. But the cost is human. The people sorted by the principle are not categories. They are individuals with complex identities, mixed heritages, and lives that do not fit neatly into the boxes the law creates. And the two states, Iran and Israel, locked in their permanent shadow war, are both using the same ancient rabbinic principle to define their enemies and their citizens. Iran uses it to identify Jews as internal threats. Israel uses it to identify Jews as potential citizens. The targets are the same people, the goals are opposite, and the principle, unchanged for 2,000 years, is the engine of both systems. The meeting in Qom in March of 1979, the list with 340 names. Khomeini's question: how do you know these people are Jews? The answer: their mothers. That answer determined everything: the arrests, the executions, the exodus, the demographic collapse, the covert operations, the genetic testing, the surveillance, the immigration. All of it flows from one principle: maternal descent determines Jewish identity. And in the archives in Tehran and Jerusalem, the lists are still there. Names, mothers' names, grandmothers' names, lineages traced back generations, recorded in files, encoded in databases, verified through documents and DNA. The states may fall, the regimes may change, the borders may shift, but the lists will remain, because the principle is not political, it is not religious, it is bureaucratic, it is a tool of record-keeping and population management. And once a state starts tracking maternal lineages, the tracking does not stop. The files grow, the databases expand, and the people on the lists, whether they know it or not, are marked for life by a decision their mothers made, or did not make, or had no choice in making. The Jewish cemetery in Tehran, 43 graves from 1979. The names are still visible: Habib Elghanian, Sarah Mizrahi, 41 others. Each headstone has a name, a date, and a cause of death. Executed by the Islamic Republic. And next to each name, in smaller letters, a notation: mother's name, because the state needed to record it, because the principle required it, because 2,000 years after the rabbis created the matrilineal rule to protect Jewish women from Roman violence, an Islamic revolutionary regime was using the same rule to identify their children and execute them. The principle survives. The people do not always survive. And the tragedy is that the law designed to ensure survival has become, in the hands of states, a mechanism of control, exclusion, and death. The rabbis could not have known. They were solving the crisis in front of them. They were protecting the vulnerable. They were preserving the community. And they succeeded. The Jewish people survived. But survival has a price, and the price, 2,000 years later, is written in the files in Tehran and Jerusalem, in the genetic databases, in the immigration records, in the surveillance logs, in the graves of people who were killed for having Jewish mothers, and in the lives of people who are living in exile, in hiding, or under restriction because somewhere in a government database, next to their name, there is a notation: maternal Jewish ancestry, verified, and that notation determines everything.